Good. Can you record on your side?
I got it going.
Okay,
Oh,
good.
sorry.
Awesome. All right, everybody, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. This is Dave. I'm here with Dave, which is great. Two Daves, one podcast. Buy one Dave, get one free. Here on the podcast, and it's exciting to have Dave Beckmeyer on the show. Outrage Overload. It's so much fun to listen to the show because if you are that type of person that's looking for an outlet, if you have any type of outrage in your life, this is the perfect one for you. And Dave covers some amazing topics with great guests, and he's got a great level-headed response just to turn down the temperature in the world today. I'm in Canada, Dave's in the US, so you already know what I'm talking about with temperature. But Dave's on the show here on the How to Podcast series to talk about his journey as a podcaster, what he's doing on his show, a little bit of AI stuff, and a lot of other great stuff. Dave, welcome to the How to Podcast series.
Dave, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to this. I feel so privileged.
You do? Okay. Well,
Absolutely.
when you get two Daves in one place, only good things are going to happen. So that's the
You'll have
guarantee.
to do like a Dave episode. We'll get like 5 Daves at once.
We'll just see. Dave, what do you think? Dave, what do you think? Yeah, it's going to be very confusing for the listener, but excellent.
There's like,
Yeah.
I was going to say there's like an old Marx Brothers movie where everybody's a doctor. It's like doctor,
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 doctor.
doctor, doctor. Exactly. Tell everybody, Dave, where you are in this big world of ours.
Yeah, so I'm in San Francisco Bay Area in California on the West Coast. We
Beautiful.
have we have a beautiful moon out today. And I don't know in the Canada, I don't know if you have a moon up there, but we have one here and it's really pretty.
We don't have moons in Canada, so it stays at the border. It doesn't come across.
Just yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was really big like 2 days ago. It was like in the daytime. It's like it felt like I was like watching like some kind of Star Trek, Star Wars thing going on. Like this big moon. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I told my wife that I got mooned and then I had to explain myself what I was talking about. But anyway, yes. So your podcast, Dave, tell us about your show.
Yeah, so it's what I've it's one of those things that like life happens and so you find yourself in these situations. And so then that got me thinking about with all the sort of we saw what happened with sort of the 2016 election. People got really kind of ramped up about that. We saw a lot of kind of people getting excited about the things like COVID lockdowns, and what we saw is people disconnecting from friends and family and breaking off friendships and blocking people on Facebook, and then of course just all the online battles and real life battles too. These conversations, so and so doesn't come to dinner anymore, this kind of stuff. And I just saw all that going on in people's lives. Almost everybody has a story like that. Even people that are like in this space, like working on these kind of problems, seem to have a story like that. And so then that just got me thinking about like, what is going on here? Like we're breaking these lifetime friendships and family relationships over politics. What's going on with us? What's going on with all of this? And so that got me, as kind of a curious nerd guy, it kind of got me thinking about, well, I think there's some things I could do with this, and there's a lot of research happening in it. So I thought, okay, well, that's a project I could look at. And so I thought a podcast was a great way to dive a little deeper than what you're going to see on the news, and at the same time make it accessible to, you don't have to be a scientist to listen to my show. Like, it's we don't necessarily go in all the math and this kind of stuff, but we'll talk about these research papers and try to bring them, discuss them in a way that anybody can get something out of it. And and then I like to bring on the actual folks that did the research. So if I got it, I don't want to just like narrate it, like I'm not really an expert, so I'll tell you what I heard, but that I like to actually say, this is what I saw when I saw this paper. Is that a good way to think about it? And then the actual person that wrote the paper can then elaborate on that and tell me if I got it right or straighten me out. And I can kind of be the person to go ask those dumb questions. Like I'm not afraid to ask the dumb questions, and then we can just have an ordinary conversation about it, rather than there are some other shows out there. I wanted to be unique in that, there's some sort of academics talking to academics, right? And they kind of go on and talk for an hour and a half in very scientific stuff. And that's great, probably, if you're in that space. Those are really interesting conversations. But there's sort of the rest of us that would like to kind of understand some of this stuff, but don't necessarily want to, really dive into that kind of meat. So that's kind of where I came from. That kind of is what brought me to the show. And so the main experts I bring on are scientists and researchers that are looking into this space, and practitioners as well. There's a whole bunch of folks looking at this problem of toxic polarization. Why are we like this? How things get here? That kind of stuff. And so that's what I do. I look at media, I look at, news and information literacy, and kind of bring some of these points out. And I'm expanding a little bit, bringing in more of my tech side because that's my background. So
Mm.
I'm sort of, because there's a lot of overlap there with things like algorithms, things like AI. So I'm bringing in a little bit more of that tech side of my background.
It's interesting because the traditional media outlets, you can definitely tell which way they kind of lean when they do their reporting. I know in Canada, we have our own issues here. We have a public broadcasting system that is funded by the government in power. So they become a talking puppet for the government, and whatever they want them to say, they'll say, because that's where they get paid. So we have our own issues up here in Canada as well. And it's very frustrating because you only feel like you're getting one side of a conversation or one side of a story, and everything kind of leans one way or the other way. And in that leaning, then you have one group of people who are completely in favor of what's being said, and then another group of people that are completely against what's being said. And that feeds this outrage that's happening. It's like more fuel on the fire. And I noticed that podcasters are seen as more trustworthy, more truthful. There's a companionship that happens as a listener with your favorite podcaster, where you become their source of truth. Now that can be abused as podcasters, but I kind of like when a podcaster can kind of take the middle and foster conversation and have somebody on that disagrees with you as a host, and you have a conversation. And at the end, you're still friends. You can still shake hands, go for coffee, everything's great, but you can have a dialogue. And what's happening, I think, is there's no more dialogue left in the world. It's whatever my belief is, and don't ever do anything to step on my belief. But I like the idea of our responsibility. It's one thing to have my right, but it's also what's my responsibility with my right? And then fostering that conversation. That's what I love about your show, is you're fostering conversation, and you're not afraid to go to topics that most people would be like, we're not talking about that with Uncle Harry at the next Thanksgiving dinner, because we know it's not going to end well. But you bring them up in a very interesting way, and you kind of diffuse the outrage with your show, which I really like.
No, well, thanks. I want to point out I don't really have like a debate show, but
No.
and you brought up so many things. There's so many threads we could pull on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think one thing you noted is that we don't have these dialogues, or we also don't see them that much, right? Because so we don't get models of what a dialogue like that can look like in general anymore. Um, because A, we don't do it ourselves, and B, it's not being shown to us in media. What's being shown to us are these, extreme positions. And, it's almost like it's the formula, right? You're going to come on the show. And I'm sure the producer basically tells them, well, I know this is true because people in the media have told me this, that the producer basically tells them, I want you to take the most extreme position you're willing to take and stick to it. Like, don't let the other person change your mind. Always, always confront, 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 because this is the show that we have. And this is what we see. So that we think this is dialogue, right? But of course, it's not. And so that's one aspect of all that. And the other aspect is this: we get in our bubbles, and so we're not used to seeing contrary views, like you talked about. All the certainly if we're watching TV, but this is true also. It's certainly heavily true on TV these days, but it's true within other media as well. There's no such thing as unbiased at everything. Everybody's, you're always going to get a little bit of a biased take. There's more or less of that, but for the most part, we put ourselves in these bubbles, as sort of people call it, or silos, information silos, echo chambers, all these different terms, where we mostly only hear or see people that sort of say the things we mostly agree with. And so we aren't used to when something pops out that's not part of that bubble. It's not part of our tribe. It's not what we're used to. And we really haven't built up the skills to kind of stay in the moment when that happens, right? We kind of jump very quickly into kind of fight or flight kind of responses. And and then everything just goes sideways once that happens. And
Right.
it's hard even if you have some training in this. This is not natural to work through that discomfort, right? You're not going to be comfortable with it, but to work through that discomfort requires, some training and practice. It's not just, you can't just go read a book about it and then say, now I'm going to be good at it. You have to actually do this. And we don't have opportunities to do that. And that's a big challenge. And again, it's not modeled for us, like you say. We don't see this happening very many places. And in terms of that, I still think about that idea. Like maybe I should do. I get a lot of people asking for this kind of thing. Maybe I should like host. I don't think I want to necessarily be the participant. Maybe I could moderate or host, some of these kind of dialogues, because I am a trained moderator with a group called Crossing Party Lines, where we have these conversations. And so that I think people would benefit from that, like seeing these if people are willing to share and go, there's an ethics issue, right? You wouldn't just want to record something and not tell them, but share a conversation like that where you did model this kind of civil dialogue and working through that discomfort, because again, we're not used to it, and it can be really hard, even if you are trained to do it.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Again, without it getting to the point where we see modeled on TV, where it gets people just throwing insults at each other. Like you're pretty soon it's going to turn into like a wrestling match, and chairs are going to be thrown. But to actually have a conversation with people and that respect, which is what I like about what you do. There's respect in what and how you handle topics. You're not to be sensational and clickbaity. You're really kind of trying to get to the heart of an issue and bring it out in a way that benefits everybody. So tell me more about your audience. How did you kind of settle on who is your ideal listener for your show?
Yeah, one of the sort of models that I use, I don't know if it's a perfect model, but it's definitely much more of a psychographic than a demographic. And there's this idea, this hidden tribes, which kind of falls out from some of the research, and they broke down U.S. politics, but I think this could apply in other other places as well. Instead of it sort of just being a binary of left and right, they kind of broke it down into this sort of five groups. And I don't remember all the names of the groups, but one of the big areas is this idea that they kind of categorize what they call the exhausted majority,
Hmm.
which is really most of us, and it's basically everybody except the extremes on either side, right? And so but they're sort of silenced in some sense, or they're at least they've self-silenced to a degree, right? Like pulled back from social media, because you go into a group and say, well, I agree with you on this, but here's I have this other opinion about guns or abortion, and people are like, what? You can't have that opinion when you're in this group. You must hold all these opinions together. Opinions, like us everywhere. You can't have any cross-cutting opinions. So that's one of the things that I look at. It's people that are they're sort of fed up with this, the animosity, the fighting, the hostility, the anger, the rhetoric. They're kind of burnout on that. That's a big factor in this. And also they're kind of burnout on this, um, being excluded if you don't adhere to the ideology sort of to the letter, right? There's no opportunity to have a cross-cutting thought. And that's what I've identified as, the segment. Now, still figuring out, in a rough way. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, sort of periphery around that, but that's the core of it. That's folks that are like, they've kind of reached their outrage overload, or they're close to it. They're kind of aware that this is happening and they kind of don't like it, and they want to just understand it better. And that's probably the starting point. Like you have to be a little bit self-selecting to say, I realize I'm getting triggered. I'm getting mad all the time. And it doesn't feel good. Like it's not working for me. So that's kind of the demographic starting point, or the psychographic starting point. It's like I'm kind of burnt out on being mad all the time.
Hmm.
And so now what's that mean? And then the second aspect of it is just I'm a curious person and want to understand it better. And then ultimately maybe I can learn some techniques and things that can help me personally. And then what are some ways maybe this can expand into a larger, how can we kind of start repairing this at a societal level?
Does a show like yours attract maybe some unwanted comments and people like, how dare you? And do you get any of that?
Yeah, because I have an audience that isn't all, liberal, or I mean, we have to be careful of these binary
Yeah.
things anyway, but we use this language all the time. But I have folks that self-identify on, what you might call the left, or you might call the right, or you might call it liberal, you might call it conservative. So I have folks that self-identify, as either somewhere along that spectrum on either side. And some things I will sometimes get are, you were too easy on that person, whether, they were, because they weren't the person that they weren't on their side or whatever. And they felt like I was too easy on them. And many times I'm doing that on purpose, right? Because it's a platform to express these views, and I may or may not, sort of qualify a little bit and say, hey, this is not a consensus view, some people challenge this, or I might not, I might just kind of let it stand and move on to the next thing. So sometimes people have felt like I should, turn it into more of a debate, and it's really something I don't want to do. That's not what this show is about, really becoming a debate show. It's really about, sharing a perspective on some research, sharing a perspective on some other work in this space, sharing a perspective from the perspective of a practitioner who's trying to help in some way with this problem. And you may not agree with their approaches, or you may not agree with the research, their conclusions. And so sometimes I'll get some feedback like that. But the thing that I get as the positive, the most consistent positive message that seems to span across everybody is they really appreciate having a place where there are these more balanced perspectives. I take that pretty seriously. I'm not exactly a trained journalist. I'm actually in journalism school at Michigan State right now.
Hmm.
Go Spartans. And
Yay.
and yay Spartans. And so I'm taking journalism school, but I'm not, full on, I'm a beginner in that. But I do take the ethics of that journalism role seriously. I do know I'm bringing bias to the table, like you can't not. So I really try to be cognizant of that in how I edit things, what I include, what I leave out, just in terms of topics, in terms of all
Mhm.
of it. And I have built up a network of people that are cross-cutting across the spectrum that I run things by sometimes. There's people, particularly people that are a different place than me on the spectrum, and I'll run things by them. So, hey, what do you think here? Am I getting this right? Am I bringing too much bias to the table? So, I'll do that kind of thing too, because I do take this role of trying to be nonpartisan and bring a balanced view very seriously.
Okay. I like that. Um, for your show then, how much prep time goes into a typical episode?
It varies quite a bit.
Yeah.
2024 for me was the year of experimentation, so I tried a lot of different things. And I did a documentary episode um, that came out over the summer about, it's called the uh, America on the Knife's Edge, which is kind of about our 50% plus one situation. We have a very rigorously divided nation. And that was a lot of work, right? That was a lot of work because it's multiple interviews, it's editing in a bunch of different stuff, it's bringing in narrative, it's writing scripts. Um, and so that episode, is months of work, right? That was a lot of, and I'm by myself. I don't have like a team. I'm doing all this on my own. So that was a lot of work. A typical episode, um, it's often I'm getting better. Like in the beginning, I think I had to edit a lot more because I wasn't as good of an interviewer. And I realized after the fact, I got things out of order and I straightened it out to make a better story. It was a lot more work in editing. So it varies quite a bit from typically, I'm probably spending for every episode I produce, I'm probably doing 5 or 6 hours of research, maybe more, because there's a lot of papers
Wow.
I never bring on the show. Like I'm reading tons. I sort of sometimes joke that I'm reading the books and I'm reading the research papers, so you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's the idea. So I read a ton of research papers. I'm reading a lot of books. I'm not a very fast reader. Some of the stuff's pretty dense, right? Pretty
Yeah.
dense material. So there's hours and hours just in research before I've done anything just to get there. And then, the actual episode itself it comes together pretty quick typically, right? So you have, an interview. If I did it well, it's not that much editing. And then I've shortened back something again. We probably talk a little bit about feedback from listeners and trying to sort this out. Is I've shortened. In the beginning, I was doing these longish intros that were like little mini documentaries, and they might be 5 minutes, they might be 8 minutes long. And I'd splice in news clips and a bunch of other things, and I'd do a pretty long intro. Those were a lot more work because I'm almost doing a little mini doc just in that before I broke into the interview. So I got some feed. So some people, it's polarizing because some people started saying, "Well, I just want to get to the interview."
Yeah.
Um, so okay, so I lean towards much shorter interviews where I just sort of do a real quick what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, who our guest is, and why they're critical to this, why they're sort of qualified to talk about this topic, and that's about it, right?
Mm.
It doesn't need as much, and some interviews don't need as much setup again because the way that interview went, I did enough setup that the interview was pretty much speaks for itself. And I have a couple episodes where I don't do any intro at all. I just jump into the interview, and I might cut a quick little cut like, oh, here's who you're listening to, because like, why is this person talking? I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
And I'll just do a quick cut of who they are, and that's it. Like, I've tried that experiment too. But so, so that's brought some of that. My workload is less. Like, this idea of not doing these 8-minute intros, my workload is less, and I still haven't decided. I definitely have my segment that says, yeah, I like that because I just want to get into the interview. But if you look at the numbers, the
Mhm.
downloads and the consumption and all that kind of and now analytics that we have available to us, those episodes with the 8-minute intros did fine and do fine. People obviously are listening to them and they like them. So it leaves me a little bit wondering, should I do that again? Or,
Yeah.
and so the way I'm looking at it now is I try to do the intro that seems appropriate for this interview, like how the interview went and how much does it speak for itself. Maybe it only needs a 30-second or 1-minute interview. Maybe other ones do need a little bit more setup. Like I did an episode on about our COVID response and whether it was what you know, did we go too far one way or the other, or some of these, the touchy topic, right? So,
Yeah.
and I had a person who's got some very controversial thoughts on that, and I felt like that needed a lot of setup because I had to put our mind back in. Remember what things were like in
Hmm.
2020? Like, it's so easy to forget. So I did a really long setup on that because I wanted to remember, like, remember we had lockdowns. They came out of nowhere. There was no food on the grocery stores, and nobody was driving cars, and we were afraid to go. Just because it's hard to put your mind back there. So I did a really long setup for that one to just set that up to kind of remind us what that was like at the time we're making these critical decisions. We're in the middle of it too. So
Right.
just, you can't necessarily get everything right when you're when you're in the middle of everything. So that one had a long setup. But that's just so that's kind of how I'm driving these intros now, and how much time they take to do. It kind of depends on what, and sometimes I feel like I'm phoning it in with these short interviews, right? Or these short intros. It's like way easier for me,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and as you're listening to this, make sure you're hearing what Dave's saying, that you listen to your audience. Like when you get that feedback, there's a reason they're giving you that feedback, and it takes a lot of effort for a listener to leave feedback, because like I hear all the stats, like 1%, 2%, 3% of your audience will ever respond to anything you ask them to do. So, 100 people, one person is represents 100 people. That's you're expecting, like, 50% of my audience is going to reach out. 75% is going to give me a feedback or comment. No, it's not going to happen. So that's a huge mountain for them to climb, even just to send you an email or a voice message or whatever. So you need to really pay attention to that. Some things are not going to work for your show. Like if I leave Dave feedback and say, Dave, I love your show, but I would really like it if your episodes were 12 hours each. Well, obviously, I'm not going to do a 12-hour podcast. That's ridiculous, right? But there's something in there. There's some little piece that you can pull out of that comment, even if you can't action the comment. There's something in there that you could apply to your podcast. So you want to really encourage that. And I heard somebody say that if you ever poll your audience and you ask them a question, ask them to respond, you better have a reason for it and you better action that poll. Because if people take time to respond to something and then you never reference it in the future, it's like, I I answered your poll and you've never referred to it again. It's kind of like the national anthem. You hear it at the beginning of an event and then nobody references it after the fact. It's like, well, what's the point of that, right? So you want to make sure that you're actually leveraging that feedback. So anytime somebody sends you a message, a DM, a phone call, a message, an email, whatever, your radar should go up and go, hang on, this is a big thing that's happened here. Somebody's actually reached out to me. So how are you encouraging that feedback for your show?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the story people say, like, if you see one ant, there's really 10,000 ants, right? So
Yes.
sometimes those comments are a little bit like that. If one person took the energy to say it, there's maybe some more people too. But I also qualify that a little bit, but don't forget to stay to your sort of core mission. Like,
Yeah.
be careful of going off in some really strange tangents. It's kind of always kind of frame it around that, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how do I try to get people to engage? I do have a mailing list. So those are probably my like super fans to some degree if you signed up for the mailing list, right? Or at
Mhm.
least some percentage of those are probably some super fans. So that's one way. And and then I'll do the normal kind of call to actions at the end of the show. I do some social media, and once in a while you get some feedback there. I haven't found that. I mean, I'm not a social media influencer. I mean, and I've never been, even though I'm early adopter of all that stuff because I was in tech, doesn't mean I'm not a 13-year-old girl doing posting, generating an audience, right? So
Doing your dances on TikTok? No.
yeah,
Yeah.
and all that kind of
No.
stuff, right? So, and it's not a place, again, as a single indie, I just only have so many hours in the day, so I've had to try to prioritize where I put that energy. And I was talking about the percentage people apply. I've talked to a lot of folks with, some pretty big numbers in their show, and they talk about like it's even less than 1%. It's more like a tenth of 1% of people that
Wow.
actually respond.
Yeah.
And maybe that's as you get bigger, maybe when we're smaller, you can consider our audience a little bit more of super fans, and as you get bigger, maybe that's an aspect of that. You kind of broaden out, and they're just more ordinary listeners. But yeah, so and I have also done something where I actually, if I can do it, I'll try anyone I can get contact for. It's like if I have their email some way, or they've reached out on social media, I will ask them if they're up for a 20-minute live conversation,
Wow.
and I'll try to get them to come on Zoom. Um, and I typically have about 5 questions that I go through with them, and so I ask them for 15 or 20 minutes, and I do respect that if they want to, if that's it, that's it. But sometimes these go a little bit longer. Again, I don't want to take up their whole afternoon, but some people want to say more, and it might go a little longer, and those are quite helpful, right? Because you really get to hear their own emotions about it. And a challenge here is nobody wants to be no one wants to give you bad. I don't want to give bad feedback. Like if I have podcasts, I'd probably want to tell them something bad, but it's hard, right?
Okay,
And nobody
Dave,
wants.
tell me, Dave, I can take it. Tell me. Yeah.
It's really hard. So I'll ask questions that kind of try to bring that out. Like, so for someone else that wanted to listen to the show, what do you think I could change that would help them,
Smart,
and things like
smart.
that, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that, where it might be a little more take the personal out of it. Like they're not criticizing me. They're not criticizing me. They're speaking on behalf of somebody else, and try to get some of that kind of feedback. But it can be really hard to get, because sometimes you ask a question, like you were saying, you're going to do a poll. I've been doing that space in the business, that kind of thing in the business world for a long time, where it's like I'd always ask who's ever trying to put this poll together, like, what do you want to happen from this, right?
Yeah.
Something like that, right? So you do have to kind of understand that. So like, sometimes you'll ask a question where you try to be really specific, like, which episode do you really like? And they'll be like, oh, I like them all. It's like,
Yeah.
they're not going to give me the detail, stuff like, you get a lot of those kind of answers. So if you're in a live call, you can maybe try to drill down on that a little bit, that kind of thing, right? But if you just have a poll, you might not get that kind of data. So, those are, those I count, of course, 100 times more than a poll, than a Facebook poll or something, right? Because I actually had a live conversation with this person, and I try to pull out some of that emotion, and use that. So, you can't do that at some huge scale, but I mean, you can do it. I mean, there's enough hours in the day that you can grab 20 minutes to talk to a real listener.
So I did an episode about this in the same kind of concept, and I equated it to Taylor Swift. At a Taylor Swift concert, she has that song 22. She's wearing that fedora hat. She dances down with her crew all the way to the end of the stage, and there's one lucky fan at the end of the stage who gets the hat. And Taylor gets down and acknowledges that one fan, gives them the hat from her head, puts it on their head, they hug and whatever. And then it's just that one moment where everyone in the stands is not jealous of that one person getting one-on-one time with Taylor Swift. They're all kind of like celebrating the fact that one person gets to do that. So Taylor does for one, which is something she'd wish she could do for everyone, but that's with that scale of attendees for a concert, there's no way she can. And that's a lot of
Right.
hats. So
Yeah.
she just one and she just signals at one person. So I love when you can sit down with somebody like you're doing. You're not doing it en masse. You're not doing it in a big group setting. You're just doing it one on one. And I think that person leaving time with you is going to remember that when they see a sea of other podcasts about whatever. The time they sat and talked to Dave Beckmeyer is like, that's so cool. Like, I got to talk to my host that I listen to because again, podcasting is a companion sport, right? They're taking you along the journey with them. So there's a natural built-in relationship, even though they had never talked to you before. So to do this in real time and have them on the screen with you, it's really smart. I like how you do that.
Yeah, thanks. And I did do one event too. I did a Facebook event, and I don't want to do more of those, but that's a lot of energy to kind of promote that and get it out there. But it was amazing. I had, I don't know, 50, 60 people on a Zoom call,
Wow.
and we talked about that documentary episode that I did over the summer. Um, and
Wow.
that was really cool. And when I think I scheduled it for an hour and a half, and a lot of I said, at the end, hey, hour and a half, that's what I asked for, so anybody can jump off. But people hung around for another like 45 minutes after that.
Awesome. That's
So that
amazing.
was pretty amazing. Yeah.
So talk more about just kind of your podcast in general, from episode 1 to where you are today. How is Dave Beckmeyer different as a podcaster?
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm different and I hope I'm better. um, I mean, I think, technically there's lots of small things, I've gotten better at, just some of the meat of the audio engineering, and some of that is probably better. One thing I really tried to work on, and I still have a long ways to go, is sort of the narration pieces. In the beginning, it was pretty stoic. It was pretty dry. And I've tried to bring more energy. And one thing that has helped, I think it has helped for me, is now when I'm recording those um, narrations, I stand up. So I'm kind of an animated speaker, as you can kind of see. So
Mhm.
um, that I think that's helped a little. I mean, I still think like I said, I have a ways to go, but I think that's helped a little that I stand up when I record those narrations now. I think that's helped. And then and I'm trying to get better with all the voice technique. I mean, I should never do a podcast really, because I have some speech impediment issues, and stuff like that. So I should never do a podcast. But I think that's a good example of how the listeners are kind of there with you on this, right? Like
Yeah.
they yeah, and I definitely, there are definitely those people out there, what do they call, like misophonia and stuff like that, that probably can't deal with my podcast. I probably sometimes make too many mouth sounds or something else. And we're probably all going to have that to a degree, where there's just going to be those people that are like, there's something glitchy about your sound and I'm going away. But,
Mhm.
for the most part, listeners want good content, and they like the audio levels, get that stuff right. It sounds okay in
Yeah.
the car, things like that. So I think all those things I've improved on, to some degree. And I keep working on trying to get better at that. Those are some of the biggies. I think, like I say, I've taken feedback from listeners. I've shortened my episodes a little. I still don't know. I don't want to become. One thing I don't want to make anything sacred on my show, in terms of, like I've taken the intro. I love my intro song that I got for the podcast. It took me forever to say, fine, I'll do a shorter version, because it was like 45 seconds, and I still love it. Like I just kind of jump around to it, right? But I do now a 15-second version of that intro, of that welcome. That's just a little welcome piece that has that same music, but I chopped it down to 15 seconds. And like I said about the intros, I used to do these 5-minute, 8-minute intros. And now I'm typically doing a 2-minute, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, but something like in that range, some kind of a 2 or 3 minute, maybe, yeah, something like a 2 or 3 minute intro. Um, just kind of a setup. I mean, intro may not be the right word, but it's kind of a setup of why we're talking about this, what is it, and who is it. So I've cut that back. But again, I want to be a little bit cautious about making rules. Like, okay, I made episodes shorter, but if an episode needs to be longer, it needs to be longer. Like,
Yeah.
that's the challenge. Is like, it should be the right length, and that's I think something we have to keep in mind. There's no real rules about that. That's one of the nice things about a podcast.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I've kind of strived towards, a little shorter episode. They're just being a little bit more brutal on the editing, um, and really trying to make a narrative out of it, keep the story flowing, and keep it interesting. That's I think a change. But again, I'm not afraid to make a longer episode if it needs to be. That documentary episode I did was longer. I think it's almost an hour, maybe 50 something minutes.
Mm.
But I'm kind of looking at 30-ish minutes if possible. But again, I want to be really careful about saying there's a hard number. There really isn't. I think those are some of the biggest changes that I've made. But again, I'm still in experiment mode. I mean, one thing I mentioned about 2024 being kind of experiment year of experiments. It's great, and I really, want to keep doing more of that to a degree. But one of the downsides of it is, now what? Like, I've done all these experiments. It's a little hard to figure out. None of them were just clearly, oh yeah, we're going to do that from now on because it's way better. Like, it really had that kind of feedback. Some of the feedback's a little polarizing. Some people like it, some people don't like it. So now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. You paint yourself into a corner a little bit there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You sent me a file today, which I was listening to, and it to quote you, it kind of creeped me out a little bit as well, where you can take like a document, whatever. I don't really understand it all. You're going to help me figure this out, being the techie AI guy. But you take this information, you give it to this thing, and it gives you back basically a summarized audio version with two voices talking about the document you've provided to them, and they're summarizing it. And it sounds like a podcast, like we don't need to show up anymore. And I'm like, well, this is weird. Well, I'm going to put a clip into the podcast that we're talking about this. But can you explain to me what this is for people who have no idea what we're talking about, and kind of how you feed this thing? And then again, we'll have the result here for people to hear some of it. But can you explain to us what is this sorcery that's happening, please?
Yeah, and I know a lot of podcasters pay attention to what's all's going in this in going on in this AI space. So a lot of people have probably seen this, but Google recently introduced this thing they're calling Notebook LM, and it's kind of the opposite. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's not quite right, but it's a little bit opposite of the regular ChatGPT type things, where it produces an audio instead of sort of taking audio, transcribing, and dumping that into the chat GPT type thing, which we often do.
Yeah,
This
no
kind of
worries.
goes the other way,
Yeah.
where you dump it, some kind of document you're working on or some kind of information that you have, and as a document, and then it creates, like Dave says, kind of a podcasty type thing. It creates what they call a discussion about it. And I haven't even identified all the different ways you can tweak it. The thing you're going to hear was like with no tweaks, just like given this information, do something. I don't know, do your thing. I don't even know for sure what the thing is if you don't give it any parameters. I gave it no parameters and just said do a thing, and it did. And like I said, it's like for me, it's a little creepy, and I almost feel violated a little bit. And so the documents that I gave it, one was a document about kind of the information and work I've done on kind of who is this podcast for. So a lot of it's about that avatar, that target listener, that target audience. A lot of that information I fed to it. A lot of the work I've done in that area. And then the other one was kind of core mission, a document about core mission of the show, like, and what we're good at, what we're not good at, where we could maybe spend energy, where we should not maybe not spend as much energy, kind of a core document, core mission, core, not exactly core values, but core mission, and sort of what space is this podcast in, I guess is the best way to think about it. So I fed it those two documents, which are sort of ongoing work that I do about the show, that I've done about the show since day one, and I kind of continually kind of evolve and work on these documents. So I fed it those two documents, and that's what produced this. I think it was about a 10 or 12-minute
Yeah.
conversation about it. And my wife listened to it, and she was kind of freaked out about it too. She was like, "They're doing your show."
Yeah. I'm afraid that it's gonna do my show and do it better than me. And then I'm like,
Yeah, me
okay,
too.
well, I guess I'll just go for have a drink or something. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
what was the document you gave it? Like what format was it?
oh, right. So you can upload, a regular Word doc or whatever, but
Okay.
I gave it to, I do a lot with Google Docs. So I gave it to Google Doc, basically Word doc type
Okay.
documents that like I say, these are kind of living documents that I've been doing since the beginning of the podcast. One of them about kind of who's my avatar for the show, who does this podcast serve, and how does it serve them and things like that. And another document about kind of, yeah, the core mission, like what is this podcast? Why does this podcast exist?
Interesting. All right. Yeah, so we'll put that clips of it kind of scattered through our conversation here. Um, if we joked before we hit record that AI is the dumbest it's ever going to be right now, and this is just like the ground level. It's going to get better. It's going to improve. But if this is the ground level of what AI can do, I don't know. Like, how are you feeling about the future of AI podcasting related? Like, where are you at with all this?
Well, here's where my head goes on this kind of stuff. I think a lot about sort of philosophy about these things and some of the neuroscience about some of these things, and questions like consciousness and self and things like that. And I think this raises a lot of issues around that stuff, right? I mean, I think one way I think about AI and some of this technology is, I think about like Google, sort of, we've outsourced our memory, to Google to a degree, right? Like uh, people don't really remember dates or how many digits of pi and things like that anymore, because I know I can just Google it, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about how your brain grows and changes and evolves, and we start off as kids, we have all these connections, and we're just looking at the world in all these ways, and we have all this exploration going on, and these kind of things. And as we mature, we start pruning that, right? We start getting rid of connections so that we can survive, so we can do the things we do. So we know how to tie our shoe now, but we probably can't do some of that, like really, abstract thinking that we could probably do as a kid, right? Because we pruned that out. So that, our brains and our perceptions are wired, or the goal is survival, not reality. Like they're not trying to be accurate. They're not trying to give us an accurate picture of reality. They're trying to give us the picture we need to survive. And what the brain thinks is important for that, right? So we don't the metric isn't accuracy. We're never going to get an accurate picture of the world. What we're going to get is the picture we need to get through the day. Otherwise, or we wouldn't have the brain power to survive if we had to deal with the actual reality. It's too much information for us to handle. And with what I worry about, if you consider that metaphor that Google, we've sort of outsourced our memory to Google search. I worry that we're kind of outsourced thinking to like these LLMs,
Mm-hmm.
the chat GPT type things. And I do wonder, what parts of our brain are we pruning off
Mm.
to survive and think about that world? Now we're going to be better at generating AI prompts. That's what our brain's going to get good at. And so instead of tying our shoes, or in addition to tying our shoes, we're going to be good at that, and not good at thinking, like not good at processing things. Because I can give ChatGPT a pretty rough thing and say, what should I, how would you interpret that? Like I don't have to think myself to
Yeah.
understand how to interpret this thing. And so that's where my wacky brain goes on these things, is what do things look like, in a generation or two, when we're pruning our brain somehow to use AI as the tool to outsource our thinking. Um,
Interesting.
and like you say, it's as dumb as it's going to get, and it's also like as hard to use as it's going to get, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to be integrated into things. If you think about I also, another metaphor or another reality that I think about is, early cars. If anyone's old enough to remember when computers were first going in cars, they were kind of in our face. Like you'd open the door and the dumb thing would say, "Door is open," and all this kind of stuff. They really wanted to show that there was a computer there, right? And now there's like 9 computers in your car and you don't even know it, right? No
Mhm.
one thinks about it because they're all just there doing their thing. And I feel like AI is going to be a little bit like that too. Like right now, AI is kind of in our face, like, oh, look, this AI did this thing. Isn't that funny? I think soon it's just going to be I mean, it already is everywhere to a degree. I mean, obviously, AI has been powering Google search for a long time, and lots of other tools have been powered by various kinds of AI for a long time. But it's going to get more in the background like that, right? It's going to be, as I'm speaking, it's going to be generating notes and doing all these things. And it's going to be doing things I can't even think of right now.
Mm.
And as it's in the background and doing all those things, how does that impact our life as well, right? Like, so when I think about how does that apply in podcasting, you've got script writing, and you've got even just brainstorming topics, you've got SEO, you've got all that kind of stuff, and we're already beginning to outsource a lot of that. There's a lot of tools out there that will help you write scripts. There's a lot of tools out there that will help you come up with titles for your show. I know you just did a segment on that.
Yeah.
And we talk about that kind of stuff a lot. So that's already out there, and that's only going to get more and more. So you do kind of wonder, like we were saying kind of before, what do I do now? What's my job?
I know. The one thing I'm wondering too, like, it's almost kind of like all these AI tools. It's almost like a snake eating its own tail. Like it's kind of like
100%.
chasing itself and kind of consuming itself in the process. So if I do a query or something and do whatever, comes back with a result, it says Dave Campbell is a herb farmer who loves tomato sauce and vacations in Spain. None of that's true. Well, I do like tomato sauce. None of that's true though. And that becomes a fact, which then goes back into the model. And now that is now a fact about me that's not true, which then becomes true as a result the next time I ask. And then it's kind of like this self-fulfilling prophecy that it's just going to, something that's not true is going to become true because it's been recited to me as true. And where's the true part anymore? I don't like that snake eating its own tail. I don't know what is coming to me is fact, or imagined fact, or kind of something that's been kind of elaborated on. Things have been bolted on that aren't really true. I use perplexity.ai, and at least in that model, it gives me some source material that I can go do my own homework. But even then, is that homework that I'm going to true? I don't like,
Right.
you know what I mean? There's
How
a
many of those
circle.
sources were created by some other AI, right?
Right.
And I thought of that right away. And it like if you look at where is AI, this AI that the LLMs at least, where do they start? Well, they start with this whole, the knowledge base of I don't know whatever amount of human information they've been dumped into, right? But at some point, it's just everything new coming out is now AI generated. So at some point, like you say, that snake eating its tail, it's AI being fed by AI. So where is the new create? If all this, if it's relying, in the beginning, supposedly getting all its creativity and its idea of how language works from humans, but now it's just being fed more, right, more stuff that was generated by. At what point? At some point, does that just keep devolving?
Mhm.
At what are there humans still feeding it at some point, or is everything? What percentage of it is being fed AI feeding itself, feeding itself, feeding itself, and does it, degrade a little bit each time? Right. If you think about how memory works,
Yeah.
we every time you recall a memory, it actually gets put back again and it gets distorted a little bit. So the
Hmm.
more you recall a memory, the more distorted it gets.
Hmm.
And I see AI a little bit like that, right? I mean, it just keeps feeding itself more stuff, and maybe it's a little each time it gets a little bit more distorted. And yeah, where does that lead in the end? Yeah, I have the same kind of thought. And what do we do about that, especially if we've outsourced our thinking so we can't generate new stuff on
Right.
our own without it, right? Like we can't, I kind of wonder about that. What's a generation that's never seen and never had anything but these kind of models all the time throughout almost their daily activity everywhere. Like you don't write a Facebook post without kind of using some LLM to do it, right? You don't have a like a unique thought anymore.
Yeah. And then people are like, well, that'll never impact me. If you've ever typed into a document and it underlines a misspelled word, welcome to the world of AI. Your spelling is terrible and it's
Right.
fixing it for you in real time. So, yeah, you might think you're not really being touched by this, but it's had its fingers on you somewhere. It's had its impact on you in the past. So, yeah, I don't know. It just, in the world of content creation, I just kind of see people deviating to it creating the content for them now, where they don't even have an idea anymore for their podcast. They just go there and say, what should I talk about? And it tells them and they just read it. And I'm like, well, okay. Like there's a lot of vanilla happening in content right now, which I think a personal story coming from something lived as a human being who's had their heart broken or been fired from a job or whatever, that's something that these models can't emulate and duplicate in a way that we can do. So I'm finding that in a world of vanilla, where everybody's podcast is starting to sound the same, and now you can have two other voices do your content for you, as we talked about. I just love the idea that we can come to it and go, today, this happened to me. Here's my response. Here's what happened. Here's how I feel. That's something that we can do without leveraging any of these tools and be a human being on the mic or on camera, sharing our real live story is going to rise above some of that vanilla that's happening in the space for content. So that may be our superpower. And that might be the thing that we can develop, use the tools to help us in our processes. But when it comes to us coming to the mic and serving an audience, it's got to be us. It really needs to be us.
Yeah, and I don't know, I think, people talk about I can sort of feed it, enough of myself that it can be like me, but and maybe that's a shortcut for some people or some ways of doing things, but how far does that really go? And I think that bucking the trend or doing something that stands out in that way is so key to, it's so easy to just, do what everybody else is doing, right? And just sort of what does a podcast equal? Well, it's two people sitting behind a mic and talking,
Mhm.
right? And just sort of formulaic. And I think, thinking about my show a little bit, the, I think the easy way is to leverage the outrage, right? That's what most shows do. Like I'm going to intent. In fact, I've looked at some of these marketing, gurus and stuff, and they literally use language like use polarizing language and have polarizing
Hmm.
topics, and that'll engage people and this kind of stuff. And it's probably true to a degree, but I think there's a demand for the opposite, like because it's standing out, like it is the different thing now. That used to be the different thing that you'd have kind of the two outrageous people talking. No one saw that before. Wow, that's new. Now it's like I think it's almost like the opposite. Now it's like, oh wait, two people having a civil dialogue. That's the new thing now, right? So, so
Right.
I think that there's things like that where you can buck the trend by and still make it work. And yeah, am I ever gonna a show like mine that's a little bit going a little deeper and it's a little, you know, it's requires some cognitive load and things like that. Is that ever going to be, it's not going to be Housewives or whatever, right? It's not going to have that kind of an audience. But I think there's interest in that. Like this is interesting when it's doing something different than what everybody else is doing.
Hmm. Yeah, it's great. It's it's good. And do you have an outrage episode around AI yet?
I have recorded some stuff. I haven't, and I do another little show that's part of the Napod Pomo, the November
Hmm.
thing that I call Outrage Science Bites, where I've done some things on there. But yeah, I do want to. I'm going to be bringing that in. I've done a few. I've got a few recordings that haven't come out yet on this topic. I'm going to be bringing more of it in. I
Okay.
did one episode early on where I kind of did. It was I kind of phoning it in, and I even say that in the intro. Like I think I'm phoning it in here because very early on, I kind of asked early versions of Chat GPT about Chat GPT and about some of the tech, and what they think about some of these things, and then I did AI to make an AI voice of the Chat GPT's answer, right? So I was kind of phoning it in, but I did that episode early on. It wasn't super popular, and
Yeah.
I also did an episode with a scientist about using AI that the basically I think the title of the paper was along the lines of AI is as persuasive as humans in political debate. And
Oh.
so I had that expert on. I was a Stanford researcher, and he basically showed that in a typical debate, AI could be just as persuasive as humans.
Mm, that's interesting. Well, all right. So Dave, for people who want to come follow the show and be a part of the community and all the three things you're doing, where do we go?
Yeah, so start out at outrageoverload.net. That's where pretty much everything is. And again, I think I do have a bit of a speech impediment. A lot of times people hear outrage overlord, but that's not it. It's outrage overload, like a overloaded truck or
Yeah.
an overloaded brain. So it's outrage overload, and it's .net. And from there, you can find episodes. Also, my contact. But if you just want to email me directly, it's outrageoverload@gmail.com. And then I'm at Outrage Overload on all the socials too. I love hearing from folks. I mean, I always say this, that basically if you go start listening to one episode, you can't even make it through 10 minutes. I want to, 5 minutes. I want to hear about that. Tell me about that too. So I love feedback of any kind. And just, I just love to hear from real people about what they got out of it, or what they didn't get out of it, or what they didn't like about it. Sometimes that's just as good information as anything.
All right. I'm going to throw you in my question of the month here at the end here too. What's the last podcast that you recommended to somebody and why?
I think the last one I recommended is probably, a little bit of the opposite of my show, in that it doesn't require a lot of cognitive load. And I listen to it. My wife and I a lot of times listen to it when we're driving. It's a show called 1 Minute Remaining. And
Oh,
it's another true crime-ish podcast, but it's got a little bit of a different, their little, shtick, or their unique thing is it's a guy, Jack Lawrence from Australia, and he talks to inmates. So he has these phone calls with inmates, and the 1 minute remaining,
oh
thing is
yeah.
that the phone calls get cut off, so that they always have the 1 minute remaining at the end of the show. So he talks to these inmates, and every inmate says they're innocent, but he talks to these inmates that have a there's a reasonable idea that they may have been wrongfully convicted, and then they kind of just go through their story of their journey of trying to get out or trying to prove their innocence. That's usually what the story is. I mean, I think there's been a few cases where it's been something else, but that's been the general story, is that there's some kind of a uh, special, something interesting about their this inmate story, and then so he'll talk to these inmates in prison
Hmm.
about that.
Wow, that's a great. I've never heard of that show. I'm gonna have to put a link to that as well. Good stuff, Dave. Again, thank you for being a part of the community here on the meetups. You're an amazing contributor. When you have time to join us there on meetups, I know everybody really appreciates you and your wisdom and knowledge and all your great suggestions. You're a great addition to our little meetup community. So thank you for being a part of that.
Oh yeah, I really enjoy participating. And I always feel like, don't ask me anything. I don't know anything.
Well, you've done amazing on this episode. It's been great having you on. I hope you can come back again in the future.
I really appreciate coming, having me on, Dave. I mean, it's really fun, and also I just like feels like I said, I feel so privileged. I get to come on Dave's show.
Come on. Right? Yeah. But again, two Daves are better than one. So, Dave, thank you so much for doing this. Everybody, all the information for Dave's podcast in the show notes, as always. Go over and support Dave. I know he'd love to hear from you as well. And again, when you listen to a show, listen to the entirety of a show because that means you really love it. And then all the apps love it. And then the AI people freak out and everybody benefits. So, thanks, Dave, so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Awesome.